The high poly mesh is still nowhere as clean as we would like it to be, so let's pick it up in Blender and keep rolling. As we have used the FBX format for exporting it out from RC, we should use it for importing it back into Blender. So navigate to the folder where we have put it and import that FBX. If the file is pretty heavy, it could take some time to import it. But here we go. Even though the quality of the final photo scan is far away from being perfect, I'm still very surprised at what Reality Capture was able to squeeze out of the source footage taken on mobile. There are a few places like these handles that I would like to see replaced, or reworked rather. And obviously this gap at the bottom needs to be closed if we decide to close the gaps. So let's get started. Within the viewport settings, the statistics enables the preview of how many faces and triangles and vertices and all that stuff our model has. So it's around 4 million polygons, still pretty manageable, although it starts to be slow in Blender. And as you remember, we have generated the vertex colors, so it can be previewed from the viewport options menu. That being said, we probably won't need that preview, but it's useful to have anyway. What can we do to close the hole? The most straightforward option would be to go into the edit mode, manually select the boundary loop or the edge of the hole, and just fill it with the faces. Let's give it a try. First I will press A to select all the vertices, then search for select boundary loop, and hopefully that will outline the edge of the gap very nicely, like this. What we can do next is go Face, Fill, or press Alt F. And that will try to fill it in with the faces like this, which doesn't look well, but after some tweaking, I think we will make it work. For now, it's just a rough, how should I put it, filler. To make it work, let's go down into the Sculpt mode. Sculpting is a remedy for many things related to photo scanning. Its huge advantage compared to stretching vertices in the edit mode is that it's fast. And on top of that, it has such a nice feature, dynamic topology, meaning that we can work with a pretty horrible soup of polygons, and dynamic topology will invent the new configuration of polygons on the fly. So right away, I'm gonna turn on the dynamic topology checkbox. It will warn us that the vertex colors will not be preserved. I'm fine with that, you'll see in a moment why. But actually, you know what, let's go back into the object mode and duplicate this road block just in case we do something awful with it, right? Shift D to duplicate, M to move to the new collection, I will call it Sculpt, and the original object should be put into its own collection called High Poly, and then I will move the stuff around in the outliner like this and untick the High Poly collection, so we're left only with the Sculpt one. Now we're good to go into the Sculpt mode once more and start fixing the bottom surface. I'm using mouse wheel to scroll the top panel until I see the dynamic topology checkbox. Let's turn it on. T to open the left tool shelf and expand it like this to see the names of the tools. I'm gonna choose the clay strips brush. The strength can be set to a really low number though, because I just want to recalculate the problematic topology there. What dynamic topology does is generates the wireframe on the fly, and the detail size can be tweaked in its settings. And what I'm doing now basically is I'm recalculating the problematic topology. When the mesh is pretty dense, it can become slightly less responsive than we would like it to be. But here it's pretty manageable at 5 million polygons, approximately. It was 4 or something like that. So I'm quickly brushing over the razor sharp thin polygons created by the fill operation, massaging it very carefully. And when it's done, the dynamic topology can be turned off temporarily, especially if it got sluggish. And we can proceed with using any brushes we like, for example this scrape brush. It will help to reduce the pillow effect caused by the clay strips brush and to create some chiseled edges as well. I'm not gonna pay much attention to the bottom surface of the mesh though, because I just want to close the gap and then slap some texture on top of it, just so we have something to work with. I won't try to hammer it into looking the same as the rest of the model detail-wise. It just needs to be good enough to serve as a filler. So that's it for sculpting the base for now. Let's jump back into the object mode. There are things in life that can't be fixed by sculpting, like these metal rings, so I'm gonna replace them. Shift A, go Mesh, add a circle. I will keep it relatively low poly, so in the circle settings I'm adjusting the vertices to be 18. Then Tab to enter the edit mode, 7 on the numpad to switch to the top orthographic view, delete the half of the vertices, select these two, E for extrusion, and it's extruded out like this. This is gonna be the carcass on which the flesh will grow. I played Death Trash a little bit too much, as you can see. It's a wonderful game, by the way, try it. So in the modifiers, search for the skin modifier. It will precisely make this thing fleshy. Smooth shading should be turned on. Then how to adjust the thickness? First, let's enable the X-ray mode in the viewport settings, then select the vertices and press Ctrl A to adjust the thickness of the skin effect. It's a pretty obscure shortcut, Ctrl A, but anyway, now we have to nudge this metal ring into place. R to rotate, G to move. So I roughly place it where the original one was, supposedly. It can be hard to tell, but it's not super important, we can nail it approximately. And when the left side of the roadblock is done, we can start working on the right one. So Shift D to duplicate it, R to rotate. There are cases when in the mesh doctoring process you realize that everything should be reconstructed from scratch. There is nothing strange in it, it's totally possible when dealing with photoscan meshes. Okay, I'm putting the circles within the sculpt collection and disabling the visibility of these circles temporarily because I'll be working on the base mesh now. Look, we recreated the metal rings, but we still have to remove them from the high poly mesh, right? So back into the sculpt mode, choose the clay strips brush. Now we need to remove these parts somehow. It's easier to do it with the dynamic topology turned on, I think. So let's navigate to the top menu, check the DIN topo, and then brush these rings out of existence with a higher strength like this. You can hold Shift to enable the smoothing effect. And right now DIN topo is set to relative detail, so if you are farther away from the model, the generated polygons will be bigger, so it can be used to our advantage. I don't care much about the details for now, just removing these parts. Now let's work on the top one. The process is the same. Shift to smooth it out, Ctrl to subtract, or to push the polygons inwards. As usual, I'm trying to follow the shape dictated by the reference model. Now moving onto the right side of the mesh and trying to dissolve the protruding parts there. It is almost satisfying to see these rings melting away under our brush strokes with the help of dynamic topology. It is such a useful workflow that we can remove geometry like that on the fly without caring too much about the wireframe and stuff like that. Thanks goodness we have such thing as dynamic topology implemented in Blender. And thanks Blender devs, as usual. And now back into the object mode again. I think it's time to re-enable the visibility of the circles. And I think we pretty much finalized the look of the high poly model. There's just a few minor things left, and we can proceed to creating the low poly alteration.